Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. My name is Jeff Overmars, and I'm a communications advisor at the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. I'm pleased to welcome everyone here today for an update from the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism. I'd like to acknowledge that we're hosting this virtual session in the territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation, the unceded territory of Mi'kma'ki. The Mi'kmaq people have made this land their home since time immemorial, and they are the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. Our relationships here in Mi'kma'ki are governed by the treaties of peace and friendship, and we hope to imbue some of the Mi'kmaq wisdom around Imsit Nugama, the interconnectivity of all of us and all things here in this province as we embark to raise awareness and remove barriers for all people to full participation. I'll just pause a beat to ensure that we give due recognition to the people of the land, but I would also like to recognize the contributions of persons of African descent to the province and culture of this province. I do want to acknowledge that African Nova Scotians have made homes in Mi'kma'ki for more than 400 years, and in that time faced extensive systemic, persistent anti-Black racism rooted in white supremacy. Despite that, persons of African descent came together, worked diligently, and pushed for their rights and the rights of those in their community. And among the achievements of African Nova Scotians includes the establishment of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act and the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. And so as the Commission welcomes folks to engage throughout Nova Scotia Human Rights Week, we want to recognize that we're building on this foundational work of persons of African descent. We've got 3 guests from the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism to share a bit of an update. Roseanne Masry, Luke Powers, and Christine Gibbons. I believe, Christine, you're up first. I'll let you go. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you for having us here today. We're excited to share with you all what the office does and some of the key pieces of work that we're involved in, and to hear any questions that you have for us. So, Luke, if you want to go to the next slide. So, as many of you may know, the office was created back in 2021, and the reason that we were established was to look at how we could dismantle systemic hate, inequity, and racism, especially within the public sector, and how we can promote equity and inclusion. So we are looking at the ways in which underrepresented and underserved communities have not been well served by government and other public sector bodies, and how we can correct and rectify some of that harm that's been created. We are very mindful to do this work with community, so we adhere to the motto, nothing about us without us. So community engagement is embedded in all of our work. And we very much take an all of government approach to this work. So we consistently say that if OEA is if the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism is the only ones doing this work, then within government, then we have failed. In July of this year, we had a team join our team. So we've always had more of an external facing focus, looking at how government's policies, programs, and services impact underrepresented and underserved communities. And with the addition of the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Unit from the Public Service Commission, joining OEA, we now have an internal focus as well, where we're looking at how systemic hate, inequity, and racism shows up within the public service and supporting public servants in promoting equity and inclusion. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of who we are and who we serve. So our office, the folks within our office reflect the communities that we serve. And you can see them, the different communities listed here on this page. We are very mindful to uh, maintain space for specific communities where appropriate, as well as looking at the intersectionality in and amongst the communities that we serve. As well, our office is the lead for the 2S LGBTQIA plus community with the release of the Equity and Anti-Racism Strategy in July of last year. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of what we do and how we do our work can largely be organized into the 4 bullets on the left. So we do a lot of policy work in terms of, we're developing the 2S LGBTQIA action plan. We are looking at, we have developed and we are looking at ways in which we can help public servants better include equity and anti-racism within their work. So we've developed an equity and impact assessment tool and guide, and that looks at how we can dismantle systemic hate, inequity, and racism within the work of government. We also do equity evaluations. So the equity impact assessment tools are meant for new policy that's being created, like new legislation regulations. And then our equity evaluations look at the number of existing policies within government that we know are causing systemic harm. A second significant component of the work that we do is around engagement and partnerships. So as I mentioned previously, we know that we cannot do this work alone. We need strong partnerships throughout the province, as well as throughout government, to ensure that this work is everyone's responsibility and that everyone is intimately involved in doing this work. And that actually speaks a bit to the other side of this slide, which talks about some of the partners that we have in this work. So we know that there are offices within government that are dedicated to specific underrepresented and underserved communities, such as African Nova Scotian Affairs and the Status of Women. And
Lost your voice.
Oh, did I freeze?
Just briefly.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Sorry about that. So on the right of this slide is just the many partners that we work with, and we're constantly, we call it a bit of a dance. We are constantly assessing whether or not it's appropriate for OEA to lead for an initiative, or if we should be supporting an initiative, or we can just sort of be in behind the scenes, lifting up work that others are doing. The third category of work that we do is around education, training, and development. And this is largely the work of the new unit that joined us in July. So the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Unit. They are, a large piece of their work is educating and training folks across the public service on how to promote equity and inclusion within the public service, and on the many concepts that are involved in this space. And lastly, around evaluation and accountability. So we know we heard very clearly when we were established as an office in 2021 that it was very important for community to be able to know what we were doing and for us to be accountable for that work. So as I mentioned, we do have a equity evaluation unit, which looks at existing policy, so legislation, policy, services that are delivered across government, and evaluates those in relation to their equity and anti-racism impacts. And we have a number of public accountability measures, such as our annual report to the legislature and our public engagement website that provides continual updates to communities on the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives you a little bit more in-depth look at the work that the office is responsible for. So in 2022, the government passed the Dismantling Hate and Racism Act. So this was the first act of its kind in Canada to combine the work of equity and anti-racism. And the act provided a public accountability to a few key initiatives that the office is responsible for. First, the equity and anti-racism strategy. So this is a provincial strategy, and we'll talk a little bit about that after, so I won't go too much into that. An equity and race-based data standard. So communities very clearly told us that government needs to do a better job at how we collect data about communities, as well as how we use that data once it's collected. So we're working on an equity and race-based data standard required by the Act that would apply to all government in terms of how we collect and use and manage equity and race-based data. Third, there's a significant focus within the Act on community engagement. So as I mentioned earlier, we infuse community engagement into everything that we do in the office. It's a key tenet of ours. And lastly, the Act requires public accountability in terms of an annual report to the Legislature. So we're required to report to the Legislature each year in July on how government is doing in relation to implementing the Act. So as I mentioned, one of the key requirements under the Act is the equity and anti-racism strategy. The strategy is broken up into 5 sections. The first is really those overarching actions that will benefit all communities. So the first 2 commitments are for equity impact assessments and equity evaluations, which I spoke to previously. So we heard from Nova Scotians and communities that government needs to do a better job in terms of how we develop policy to ensure that we have within that development meaningful inclusion of communities, as well as a very robust understanding of the impacts to communities of the policy that we're creating. So equity impact assessments help with new policy, and equity evaluations help with existing policy within government. The strategy then speaks to the equity and race-based data standard that I just mentioned. It calls for the need for an action plan for the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. So when we were engaging on the Dismantling Racism and Hate Act, we understood that we needed a more focused engagement for the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, given the diversity of the community and the need to really dig into find safe spaces for the community to provide impact. So that's why the strategy identifies that we need an action plan there. Fourth is the community network grants. So the strategy talks about community network grants that are provided annually to community groups to do work in the equity and anti-racism space. And so we're just finishing up our second round of those community network grants. And we're excited to see the increased uptake, interest for those grants and the exciting work that community members want to do in this area. And lastly, in this section, we speak to hate-motivated crimes. So we heard very clearly from community that in general, hate-motivated crimes need to be better addressed. And so folks weren't feeling that hate-motivated crimes were addressed effectively when they were raised, or they just didn't really understand who they should be going to and how they should be raising those concerns. So we are embarking on some work with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission and the Department of Justice to identify ways in which we can improve how hate-motivated crimes are dealt with. And lastly, within this section, in concert with the requirement to develop an action plan for the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, OEA was identified as the government lead for the community, in recognition that whereas many underrepresented and underserved communities have offices dedicated to them, the 2S LGBTQIA plus community did not. The second section of the strategy is where we get into that all of government approach to this work. So we reached out across government to all departments and offices, and they identified the work that they are committed to doing to further dismantle systemic hate, inequity, and racism, as well as promote equity and inclusion. The third section of the strategy provides definitions of types of hate, inequity, and racism. So this is one of the requirements under the Act, that we work with communities to identify definitions for government to use in addressing systemic hate, inequity, and racism. So the definitions that you'll find in there were developed through specific community engagements and public engagements to create Nova Scotia specific definitions of the types of hate, inequity, and racism that unfortunately our communities experience. The fourth section is around community engagement. So this section of the strategy really gives you a sense of the way that our office approaches community engagement. So our office is very mindful of rooting our approaches to community engagement within the approaches that communities have validated. So you will see references to Indigenous and African Nova Scotian ways of being and knowing, and how those have infused the way that we do community engagement. And as a result of that section, or in cohort with that section, on our engagement website, which is in the chat, you will find our Public Engagement Guidebook and template, which is a step-by-step systematic way to develop your engagement, any public engagement, so so we share this within government for departments to address the concerns that communities shared with us about how government engages with them. Lastly, in the strategy, we speak to public accountability. So one of the key actions under the strategy is to develop an equity dashboard. So for that dashboard, we will be engaging with Nova Scotians and with underrepresented and underserved communities within Nova Scotia to get a better sense of what are the indicators of success for this work. So what will success look like for communities in this area, and how can that then be displayed within an equity dashboards that we can provide that another level of public accountability. And moving to the right, as I mentioned, in July of this year, we had the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Unit from the Public Service Commission join our team. And so in addition to the work that I just spoke about, they have brought with them to the office a variety of commitments around how we promote equity and inclusion within the public service. So their work is anchored in the All Together plan, which is a plan for how we can create an equitable and inclusive public service. They have an annual report that is issued every year called Moving Towards Equity, which demonstrates government's accountability to the actions required in the All Together plan. They organize an annual diversity conference for all public servants to promote the wealth of work that's happening in the equity and anti-racism and EDIA space. They coordinate a table where there are EDIA reps from all departments so that they're consistently getting together to share what's working, to share challenges, to troubleshoot, and to develop resources to support departments in their EDIA work. And they also support all of the employee networks. So we have a number of employee support networks within the public service that support various underrepresented and underserved groups. And they are all supported under the EDIA team that's now within the office. Is that the last slide? All right, so that is our last slide. So I know that's a lot of information, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a snapshot of the work that we do in the office. And Luke has put some helpful links in the chat so that you can look at some of the materials that I was talking about and access some of the resources that we've developed to support work in this area. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Christine. I just want to ask Luke to maybe repost those into the chat and just ensure that the recipients down at the bottom, that little blue area is highlighted to everyone. It may not have reached everyone directly, so just to give you a chance to do that. There was one question that came in, Christine, via the Q&A asking for clear distinction between the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission and the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism. And so I contributed the commission side of that, which was to state that the commission is the administrator of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, and it does this through a formalized dispute resolution process, as well as proactive public education and awareness building. And so any individuals that feel that they have been target of discrimination and they have identified a protected characteristic under the Human Rights Act, they can formally file a complaint in pursuit of an investigation into the matter, the opportunity to resolve those disputes with the parties. And then if that's unable to happen, there can often be a public hearing, which would allow folks to kind of determine whether or not discrimination had occurred. That's the jurisdiction of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, and the act is quasi-constitutional. And so it would sort of trump, for lack of a better word, any conflicting legislation at a provincial level. So with that as kind of the commission side, could you, I think maybe your presentation kind of clearly articulated, but just to define the scope maybe to just help that distinction for folks?
Yeah, I think your answer is great in terms of like very clearly identifying sort of the role of the commission. The office has a mandate to just look at government and what government policy, so legislation, regulations, policies, and services and programs, how they contribute to systemic hate, inequity, and racism. And like Luke mentioned in the answer there. So we don't respond to complaints of hate, inequity, and racism. That's where our relationship with the Human Rights Commission comes into play. So we regularly refer folks to the Human Rights Commission, or we'll give folks at the commission a call and say, hey, so we're aware of this. You know, how should we help this person navigate this? But we are more looking at what we're responsible for and have authority over is the policy of government and how government policies and programs are created. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that was really bang on and helped to provide the sort of clear distinction as to what our own shops are doing. There is another question that popped up in there, and it's related to social media. And so is social media utilized at all in terms of engaging specific communities? If so, any tips in doing so?
Yeah, so I'll start this, but then I'll turn it over to Luke because his team actually does engagement, and his team is the engagement and the evaluation team. But yes, we absolutely use social media. We have X and Facebook, and we regularly use those to advertise any engagement that we're having. But I'll turn it over to Luke in terms of because our public engagement guidebook and template does address some of that, I believe, or how to use
Yeah,
electric.
they're in the guidebook. There's some recommendations about the use of social media, including the channels that you can use. And for example, the official government social media accounts. We rely on not only our own social media accounts, but the social media accounts of others to boost the profile and to also work with community partners to have them boost the profile of events or post on their own accord about things that we're doing with community. So, for example, this past summer with the 2S LGBTQI plus action plan, a number of the community partners did a lot of the promotion of their engagement activities that we collaborated with them on their own, and we also boosted that as well. So definitely, definitely utilized kind of necessary, to be honest, in a lot of modern engagement activity, I guess you could say.
Thanks, Luke. And I'll count the commission amongst those that help to amplify, hopefully, the work of OEA in community. Um, One question that I wanted to throw out there, because I'm aware of the great deal of work that's going on currently to support municipalities and other prescribed public sector bodies, as they're all mandated and working on their anti-racism plans for the end of this fiscal. So come April 1st, all municipalities and prescribed public sector bodies are to have these plans in place. Are you able to speak a little bit about what those plans are looking like, how municipalities are being supported? I think it's a really fascinating way that this work is ending up on the ground, being sort of deployed and supported in every corner of the province.
I'll let Luke answer this one.
Yeah, so our engagement page actually has a tab on their or site specifically that talks about the requirements for municipalities and villages. So just so everyone's aware, under our legislation, similar to the Accessibility Act, there was provision to prescribe certain public sector bodies as requiring plans to address systemic hate, inequity, and racism. And our strategy further went on to say that municipalities and villages would be the first group of public sector bodies prescribed, and regulations were approved this past year to do just that. So they're required to have plans in place by April 1st, 2025. At this stage, it's premature to comment about how the plans are shaping up. There's some municipal folks I see on the call today, so hello to you all. I recognize some faces and names, or names actually, no faces. But we've provided a large number of resources, and we've partnered with the Association of Municipal Administrators of Nova Scotia, who are working directly to support municipalities and villages, all 49 municipalities and 22 villages. There's a lot of collaboration happening at the regional and local level, so folks are, I would say, engaged with the work and eager to meet the requirement. And part of the requirements for their plans is that there is some level of engagement with underserved and underrepresented communities. And we know that this is a first step. So there's a lot of work that's required for the province to become more equitable, inclusive, and welcoming for all people, including underserved and underrepresented communities. So we're really excited to see what municipalities and villages come up with. It's also important to note too, there's a lot of folks in municipal governments and villages already doing great work in this space. So I think it'll be an opportunity for them to profile and build on some of the work that's been done to date.
Thanks, Luke. And I believe there was a gathering recently down in the Annapolis Valley for
There
just that
was indeed.
reason, the cross kind of sharing and educating, great demonstrations of what folks are doing. Don't know if you saw, there was a question that popped up in there around potential for organizations serving 2S LGBTQIA folks to engage any in the development of the 2S LGBTQIA strategy. Is that something that you could answer just for the benefit of other folks, if there's still opportunity to engage there?
Sure. Yeah, I just put in the answer there that so the official engagement for that work has just ended in the last month or so, and we will be we're in the process now of just gather or looking at all the feedback and analyzing it to determine what the next steps will be. And we will be producing a what we heard report so that we can validate this is what we think we heard from community, and that everyone can see kind of the wealth of information that was provided through all of those engagement sessions. But there will definitely be opportunities, as the action plan is developed and implemented, for community groups and organizations to support the work of government in doing that. So absolutely. And if anyone is interested, please get in touch with us, and we'll kind of keep you. We have a roster of folks that we know are going to be interested in those next few steps, and we are happy to add to that.
Thanks, Christine. And Luke or Christina or Roseanne, I may ask you to look at the last question that was dropped in there with in addition to municipalities, villages, if there's the opportunity to voice the answers or responses to these questions, that would ensure that others have the opportunity to hear it, and then will be captured in the recording as well, if you have a response to that last question.
Yeah, I can take this, Luke, and then you can add in if you like. So yes, our Dismantling Racism and Hate Act allows for the province to prescribe public sector bodies to have equity and anti-racism plans. So the first cohort that we started with is municipalities and villages, because of the impact that they have across the province, especially for underrepresented and underserved communities. We are looking at the model that the Accessibility Directorate used in terms of thinking about what other prescribed public sector bodies we may require plans from. And obviously universities and colleges would be potentially on that list down the road. We really want to make sure that we get a really good standard model with municipalities and villages before we expand on that and require more public sector bodies to do this work. But we do know from sort of initial research with universities and colleges that there's already a significant amount of work happening in that area through the Department of Labor, Skills, and Immigration. Is it still Labor, Skills, and Immigration, Luke? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So they're already doing a significant amount of work. They have a table where they sit with all of the heads of the universities and colleges, and they're establishing requirements in this area. So it's not that the work isn't happening; it's just not required under our act to date. I hope that answers the question. Luke, feel free to add anything else if I've missed something.
No, just to clarify, like you said, there's no requirement for post-secondary institutions to develop plans yet, just municipalities and villages, recognizing that's a heavy enough lift on its own, I guess, and that, as Christine's pointed out, through LSI, there's already, and through universities and other post-secondary institutions' own initiative, substantive work in place regarding inclusion, equity, anti-racism, etc.
Thanks very much, Luke and Christine, both of you. I don't see any other pending questions submitted via the Q&A, so we can maybe give it a beat. Unless anybody wants to submit anything more in, where would folks go online to connect in with your work to stay up to date? Also within social media, what might your handles be for folks that might want to get connected?
So I'm going to type in the chat. The best email to get us at is oeaengagement@novascotia.ca. For folks internal to government, just feel free to reach out to any of us directly if you'd like. Roseanne, Christine, or myself, we're all pretty accessible and responsive, and look forward to collaborating where possible with folks. So, and in terms of handles, I can pop those in the chat as well. I'll just quickly grab them.
That's great, Luke. Thank you all very much. I don't see any more questions, so I think we're good to move on and wrap things up. I do want to highlight the fact that we've got a couple of other great sessions within Nova Scotia Human Rights Week taking place today. One that is directly connected into some of the work that you've already mentioned, and this is focusing on understanding hate crimes. This is a session that's scheduled for 1:30, so not too far from now, but there's still time for folks to register. And then following that, there's going to be a great presentation from our friends over at IONS, which is Impact Organizations of Nova Scotia, and they're going to be sharing resources and a tool on their website that they're making available for organizations that are kind of invested within this work as well. And then there's an opportunity for anyone available to attend a session at 6 o'clock at the Central Library, where Elder Joe Michael will be sharing a presentation and a talk around honoring our treaty relationships. So it's a busy day. This will be recorded, this event that's just wrapping up now, as will the others. So would encourage anybody that can't make it to check out the Human Rights Commission's website in the next 24 hours for recordings of this and other sessions. And once again, thanks so much, Roseanne, Luke, Christine, and as well to Sydney, who's been active as our ASL interpreter here today. So once again, thanks very much to everybody for your time today, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Take care.